and welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN World. I'm your host, Jessica, and this week we have Gareth from Pelgrane Press here to tell us about Fear itself. Thanks for coming back.
No worries. Always happy to babble about horror games.
Brilliant. And you have babbled about horror games with me before, because we've had you on talking about Trail of Cthulhu. So if you're interested in hearing about Gareth's background and history with games in detail, we talk about it in that episode on Trail of Cthulhu. But in case people missed that episode, Gareth, could you give a little overview about what you do in TTRPG and where people might recognize your work from?
Oh dear, I do pretty much everything at this point. I write lots of stuff for Pelgrane Press. I'm doing the new edition of Trail of Cthulhu. I did second edition of Fear itself. I did the Ocean Game supplement, which is also coming out with the Kickstarter. I've done stuff for 13th Age. I've done lots of stuff with the One Ring. The Dagger in the Heart campaign for Heart just came out. I've been around for a while. I've done many things, often either horror or adventure or horror adventure adjacent.
Fantastic, which makes perfect sense why you're involved with Fear itself. And if you're interested in how Gareth got into that, if you go back to listen to the Trail of Cthulhu episode, you'll learn a bit more about that. But as we've gone through that before in a previous episode, I'm just going to dive right into talking about Fear itself, if that's okay, because that's here to talk about. We have mentioned there is a GameFound project going up very soon for the Shattered Veil edition, which is, I believe it's still second edition rules, but it's a premium hardcover, full art, that sort of thing, yeah?
Yeah. Basically, we did the second edition of Fear itself a few years ago. We have the Spanish publisher, Shadowlands, who basically handle all Pelgrane Spanish translations. And they have their own art department. And when their version of Fear itself came out, which is the one behind me there, we went, oh, this is like, actually really, really much nicer than our English one. So we're basically contracting out art and layout so forth to them. So basically they're doing a new version of Fear itself and new version of the Ocean Game and the Confrontation Horror in English, or we're using their art for the new English versions.
Nice. So if you haven't got in on Fear itself, this is a really good time to jump in with this edition that we're going up on GameFound later this month. But before we jump into the crowdfunder, let's talk about Fear itself. So how would you introduce the game to us?
Fear itself is a game of modern day horror where you're playing mostly ordinary people. It uses the GUMSHOE system, which we have talked about last time, and I'm sure I'll give you the quick spiel again. GUMSHOE is a game of investigation. The core idea of GUMSHOE is always more fun for the players to get information. So you have a bunch of investigative abilities that always work. And then you've got general abilities you roll for, blah, 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 blah. It makes it very, very easy for the GM to construct scenarios, make sure the players are never stuck, make sure that basically the investigation always goes smoothly, and you get to the end of the mystery and then get eaten by a monster. GUMSHOE started with Esoterrorists, which is yet another GUMSHOE-powered horror game. In Esoterrorists, you're playing basically these like professional X-Files-esque investigators.
Right.
You're working for this mysterious organization, investigating mysteries. Fear itself, you're playing very much ordinary people, just random people off the street. The new edition is divided into basically setting up for one-shots, setting up for sort of like midi campaigns, and setting up full-length campaigns. And there are different character creation rules and group creation rules for each style of play, because obviously a game where you're just playing like a bunch of students who on a dare open up this old book they found in a cottage in the woods and are attacked by zombies. That's a one shot. You want a different sort of group dynamic to an ongoing campaign where you're playing Scooby-Doo-esque ghost hunters or a bunch of teenagers who were caught in a storm and developed weird psychic powers because they'd be bonded with demons or something. So basically it is a game of ordinary people who have been either come into contact with this unremitting horror or are dragged into it somehow. And there's all sorts of advice in there for building adventures, building campaigns, building one-shots, and lots of stuff about how to make things terrifying and spooky and weird.
Fab, sounds great. And how do you categorize the style of horror in Fear itself? Because horror is a really big genre and has lots of different tones and notes in it. So how would you categorize fear itself within that?
I mean, it's a fairly flexible system, so you can do any sort of, you can do like, sort of slasher horror with super serial killer. You can do sort of spooky cult stuff. My sort of like the reference point I always returned to when writing the edition was The Ring, just as that sort of like, combination of investigation, this sense of like, reality being violated by this weird thing, and lots of like, investigation into backstory coupled with character dynamics or character dynamics. Any sort of, you could do like virtually any sort of modern day ordinary person horror. It's flexible.
Well, that's always very useful. And one thing I noticed about the type of horror this is you don't expect the players to be alive at the end. Well, not the players, sorry, the characters to be alive at the end. The players should be safe, but the characters, yes.
Well, again, that's why it breaks into one-shots, mini campaigns, and long campaigns. In a long campaign, you want the players to be the characters to survive.
Yes.
In a one-shot, yes, everyone dying is not necessarily the desired outcome, but a likely outcome.
Yeah.
So there are rules in there that play with levels of survivability and resilience on the part of the characters.
And last time you were here, as we mentioned, you were talking about Trail of Cthulhu that you worked on. That's also powered by GUMSHOE and is a horror game. So how is Fear itself different? Like, what would you go to for the two different games for different experiences?
Well, Fear itself doesn't use the Lovecraftian Cthulhu mythos. It's got its own suggested horror set up with the Outer Dark, unremitting horror, which uses terrorists. The big difference, though, is that in Trail of Cthulhu, you're not necessarily playing professional investigators, but you're playing people who have a great deal of resources and knowledge. You're playing like, professors, detectives. You're basically playing sort of stalwart people who are relatively well equipped to go and delve into mysteries. Fear itself, you can build like, grizzled detectives or whatever. It equally works for a bunch of high school kids or like a bunch of friends who meet at a coffee shop or like 6 random people who happen to be all sharing a subway carriage when the train goes through a portal and ends up in hell. You're playing, again, ordinary people.
Fab. And a lot of the campaign, when I was reading through it, talks a lot about personal and psychological horror as being key themes. Is this in some of the adventures and kind of those sorts of guides in part of Fear itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you're playing ordinary people who are confronting the extraordinary and the unnatural, you're going to be playing people who are on the verge of breaking. So there's rules in there for exploring, like, mental resilience, how people cope with horror, and also there, depending on the style of campaign you're playing, rules for how to basically construct the group so that, like, there's one called the Spiral of Misery, where you work out, like, like how the characters connect, and you've one person who, like, sort of is the sort of focus point of the horror, and they drag in the next person, they drag in the next person, they drag in the next person.
Okay.
So you're sort of all like sort of pulling each other down the spiral towards despair. And the monsters in there, which come from the Book of Unwritten Horror, which was this fantastic source book written by Dave Alsop and Adrian Bosch, which really sort of defined the line going forward. It is some of the most nightmarish monsters ever committed to role-playing games.
Oh yeah, well, that segues me really nicely. And I was going to say, let's talk about the monsters and the villains that are in the game. So you're already walking me down that path. So tell me about them.
The basic cosmology of Fear itself and these terrorists is that there is this other dimension out there, the Outer Dark, which is full of creatures of unremitting horrors, or sort of default go-to name for them. And there's this membrane between our world and theirs. And that is slowly fraying, and it frays faster in places of basically pain and fear and torment where monsters slip through. So basically, a lot of the monsters are based around either urban legends and, like, folktales, or basically the horrors of modern life. So there's, like, there's like the sort of supernatural surgeons, the faculty who basically do like weird experiments and are basically all about body horror. There
Right.
are so torture dogs, which are these like grotesque familiars made of sort of half dog, half industrial tools.
Nice.
Yeah, there's lots of really lovely, well-adjusted stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah, I didn't know where to go from the half dog, half industrial tools. That
Away.
That made me yes, yeah. That just made me trip in my interview question. I was like, oh, lovely.
Yeah.
And the art style, as you say in the book, there is a lot of kind of like body horror and very creepy sort of things like that you can definitely see in there. So the game does come with adventures within it as well. Are you able to give us any kind of setups or premise for those without kind of giving too many spoilers? Or
in the core book there's three. Again, the core book has a one shot in there where you're all members of a group testing a new drug or like pharmaceutical, and it being a horror game goes horribly wrong. There's one called Glass Beach Summer, where basically it's you play these bunch of high school kids who are caught in this weird storm and develop psychic powers, and you're trying to work out basically where these powers are coming from, and the answer is not a good place. And then there's a campaign set up where basically you're playing people who listen to this radio station late at night, and the mysterious DJ gives you sort of like basically plot hooks, and you form this group to go investigate the strange hints he's giving you, and it's half basically exploring this city at its horrific underbelly, and half to work out why you're being manipulated or being pushed and hinted by this mysterious radio presenter at night. So it covers a wide range of creepy modern horror, basically.
Nice. And as you mentioned, there's different kind of design approaches and structures to running a game when it's a single game, a mini campaign, or a longer campaign. Is there kind of guidance and information, or would you be able to give us some about how, if a GM wanted to structure their own story or make their own campaign, what different things do you do when bearing in mind how long you're going to be playing for?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a chapter for each style of play in there. For one shots, it's all about basically pacing, because you're trying to fit it into like as close to one session as you can to get that sort of sense of urgency and speed. A lot of the techniques in one shots is the initial setup of player characters. Basically, you're going to build the adventure around the characters. They're going to be the ones driving it. Or a mini campaign, because you know how long it's going to last, it's going to be 6 sessions. You can sort of set up a bunch of milestones, like, okay, we're going to hit this at the end of session 1, this at the end of session 2. So you can work out roughly how the plot's going to evolve and sort of build up towards a particular climax at the right moment. And for a long campaign, it's really about sustainability. You want basically to have a sort of core loop of the players getting a mystery, going from investigating it, and then returning to that baseline.
Yeah.
And then have stuff building up over time. So each of them requires a different setup, a different set of techniques, and to a degree different player characters, because the group you're going to play in a one shot are going to get horribly killed, as we said earlier. Sorry.
Well,
fix that once.
No problem. So if somebody's approaching, if people have run kind of GUMSHOE horror games before, if they've run like Trail of Cthulhu and then they're moving to try Fear itself, because maybe they're like, oh, I know GUMSHOE, this is something I feel I can pick up and run with. Do you have any advice for them about running Fear itself and maybe tweaking their style a little bit so it fits in this kind of world and setting?
Fear itself is much. It's much less academic than Trail. Like in Trail, you've got all these tools to basically interrogate the setting and learn the backstory and work out what's going on before you tackle the monster. Fear itself is a bit more impressionistic. You will never really work out what's going on. You just work out how do we get out of here, or how do we kill this thing?
Yeah.
It's much more, because the mythos is so codified. Players sort of know what they're getting into. Whereas Fear itself, you can go with almost any direction. So basically, keep the players off balance, and also it's a much more humanocentric approach to horror. Basically, the mythos old gimmick is the elder gods don't care about you. Humanity is nothing. We're insignificant.
Yeah.
Because in Fear itself, you've got the creatures out of the dark try to get to the membrane, and the membrane is frayed by dark emotion and so forth. They want to hurt you. They want to torture you. They want you to suffer, to open up holes and get more of their kind through. So it's much more like focus much more on the characters and hurt them more.
Wow. Okay, lovely. That's lovely advice for a GM. And obviously, as we mentioned before, there's any horror game, there's like safety tools you do to make sure that the fear and the horror that you're doing is stuff that everybody's on board for, and it's the style of play that people want to play. And we mentioned that a little bit in Trail of Cthulhu in the last episode as well. And obviously that's very much a thing here as well.
Yeah.
One thing we mentioned with the GameFound crowdfunding campaign is there's kind of 3 books that you mentioned: the Fear Itself core books, the book of unremitting horror, not unrelenting. Yes. I was like, unremitting and unrelenting, probably. Yes. But there's also the Ocean game as well. Could you talk to us a little bit about what the Ocean game is?
Right. As I said, we released Book of Unremitting Horror back. The first edition was 2006 or 7 or so, like a long time ago at this point. Nearly 20 years, which is terrifying. And that was by Dave Alsop and Adrian Bott. Dave Alsop, actually, Adrian Bott, historic asterisk, is the man who came up with the leopards eating people's faces meme.
Right, nice.
Yeah. He used to work for Mongoose back in the day, and now he's off doing computer games, I believe. Dave Alsop did the art and some of the writing for the book. Dave is heavily involved he's actually one of the creators of Slay Industries from Nightfall Games. But he did the art of the Ocean game and some of the concepts, and for the Book of Unremitting Horror, and he mentioned in that the Ocean game, and he wrote up a document for Pelgrane again back in 2007 or so about the Ocean game, and this sort of sat on Pelgrane servers for nearly 20 years before it was handed to me and said, go do something like this or go do something with this. So it was an interesting project in that it was like sort of this almost like sort of horror equivalent or roleplay equivalent of found footage, where I had to sort of interpret this document and build around it. So what the Ocean game is, after all that prelude, is again, you're playing ordinary people who've been chosen by a mystery man. Mystery men are these sinister, virtually all-powerful entities from the Outer Dark, and they are playing this thing called the Ocean game. You have been dragged into it. Over the course of the campaign, you learn what the Ocean game is, what the rules are, what you're expected to do. There are all sorts of rituals and rules and factions involved in the game. Because you're playing the game, you're given these 3 blessings, which basically one lets you basically sort of see beyond the veil and see all these hidden monsters lurking around the place. One declares that as long as you're in good standing in the game, so you haven't broken any of the rules, which again you don't know what the rules are yet. You won't be. The monsters will. If there's someone else for the monster to kill, they'll kill that person first and then go after you. So you've got a level of indulgence, it's called.
Okay, indulgence. Wow.
Yep.
I'm getting to watch everyone around me die. How indulgent of me.
Well, thing is, the third one is you're given a level of protection and increased health. Sticks and stones won't break your bones is the thing. You will survive wounds that wouldn't survive. But because you've been blessed with this level of protection, this level of indulgence, it kind of falls upon you to go investigating stuff because you know that other people don't have a hope. You got some small hope. Because you're a player of the game, you're drawn into these strange mysteries. And as the game goes on, you learn other aspects of it. There's a whole level where you can change the rules of the game. And there's a mysterious cryptic reward, which all of the players of the game are after. My sort of I don't mean very, very vague here, but a lot of the game is learning what the game is.
Yeah, no, I understand. That's fine.
Yeah. My sort of elevator pitch for it is Clive Barker's Squid Game.
Right. What a pitch! What a time.
Yeah. So, and the other thing is, because all the other player characters in your group are also players of the game, there's a bit of a Highlander rule situation where you can work together, but only one of you is likely going to win that reward.
Right.
And part of the reward is be able to leave the game. So.
Right. So you get to leave. I like that. That must make for interesting player dynamics as well, because like you say, you want to work together to achieve things, but there is that element of competitiveness. So that's interesting. How do you, when you've got that dynamic in a party, how do you keep them as a table working together and in the same place? You know, how does the game help you manage that?
It does, because to get to the end game of the ocean game, you need to collect stones, which are these things you find in places where monsters have broken through.
Mm-hmm.
And you need a sort of critical mass of them to trigger the end game.
Okay.
So the players will want to work together and gather stones for a while, but when they're getting close, and again, they don't know what the threshold is, there are various ways to set the threshold. They want to work together until it's time to go all Reservoir Dogs and start backstabbing each other.
And at that point, you want them to do that because it's that point in the game where not everyone's going to survive. Interesting, great. And how many like sessions is the ocean game kind of planned to take? Or I know it always varies between.
Actually, that's one of the sort of the triggers. There's the rules there, like if you want the game to last this many sessions, then this is the threshold. If you want it to work last this many sessions, then this is the threshold.
Oh, nice.
So maybe you could probably run through it in 6 or 8 long sessions, or you can keep going. There's a bunch of non-player characters in there. There's a bunch of new monsters, a bunch of locations, a bunch of adventure seeds, and there are also 4 adventures, 2 of which are like generic fear itself adventures for anyone but they can also serve as intros into the ocean game, because basically you catch the attention of a mystery man while solving those adventures, and then you're dragged into the game. And the other 2 adventures are for active players of the game.
Mm-hmm. Nice. That sounds great. Thanks for walking me through that, because I'd heard of it and I was like, I want to know more about this. So this interview is just my way to get a bit more info from you. But yeah, so as mentioned, so that's kind of an overview of Fear Itself for everybody there. And as mentioned, coming to GameFound is the Fear Itself Shattered Veil edition, where you can get all 3 of these books in very pretty hardcovers with very nice art, as we've mentioned before as well. I think we've covered Fear Itself, haven't we, Gareth? Is that everything, or any other closing thoughts before
I think we've zoomed through it.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's a lovely little game. Very well adjusted, not at all disturbing.
Of course, which is exactly what you want for this experience.
Indeed.
Yeah. And speaking of lovely little games, do you have any recommendations for any other tabletop RPGs? And the rules on this one is games you've not been involved with in creating yourself, and of course it can't be D&D.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot for like a lot of different games lately, so that really sort of constrained by choices. I'm going to go very, very retro and say Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Oh, nice.
Because friends of mine wanted to basically drag out her old books and start a new campaign of that. So we're hopefully starting that tomorrow evening.
Oh, nice.
It'll be lovely.
Oh, lovely. Great. And Werewolf the Apocalypse, is that still a D10 dice pool?
Yeah, it's still a storyteller, I think.
Great.
It has been 30 years since we played, so...
Oh, we'll find out. Well, let us know next time how that goes. All right. Perfect. Gareth, thank you so much for coming back on. I'm sure we'll invite you back and have you on Not D&D another time, because there's so many amazing projects you're working on. So until next time, I'll say goodbye for now.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.